Have you ever found yourself trying so hard to be seen by someone who just doesn't seem to care? You give your time, your energy, your loyalty, and in return, you're met with indifference or worse, disrespect. It's exhausting, and it leaves you questioning your worth. But here's the truth: how people treat you is a reflection of them, not you. When someone doesn't value you, it's not always because you've done something wrong. Often, it's because they are blind to value that doesn't serve their ego or immediate gain. So instead of fighting for space in someone else's world, you have to ask yourself, why am I shrinking in mine? The secret to dealing with people who don't value you isn't about teaching them your worth. It's about knowing it so clearly that you stop offering discounts to those who can't afford your presence. Let me explain. In relationships, whether personal or professional, we tend to seek validation. We want to be appreciated, recognized, understood. And when we don't receive it, we push harder, we compromise more, we tolerate disrespect. We lose ourselves just to be accepted by people who never planned to value us in the first place. This is the dangerous loop, chasing validation from those incapable of giving it. The more you chase, the more you reinforce the idea that their opinion defines your value. But here's a powerful truth: you do not need to be understood by everyone. You just need to understand yourself. When you're clear on your values, your purpose, your boundaries, you don't tolerate being treated like an option. You don't need to argue your worth, because your life stops being a negotiation and starts becoming a declaration. Think about this. If you had a 100 bill and someone said it's only worth 10, would the bill actually lose value? Of course not. The problem isn't the bill. It's the perception of the person holding it. The same goes for you. So how do you actually deal with people who don't value you? First, you stop begging for respect. Respect isn't asked for, it's expected and reciprocated. Second, you learn to disengage without bitterness. Distance isn't always punishment, it's protection. Third, you fill your life with those who reflect back your light, not those who try to dim it. And here's something even more important: you learn to forgive. Not for them, but for yourself. Because holding on to resentment only binds you to their influence. Let go not to forget, but to free your focus for what truly matters: growth, peace, and alignment. People who don't value you aren't your enemies. They are your teachers. They show you where you've been too generous with your time, too careless with your boundaries, too willing to trade your peace for proximity. And once you learn the lesson, you no longer need to repeat the pattern. Dealing with people who don't value you is not about revenge. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about remembering that your energy is sacred, and not everyone is qualified to receive it. The moment you understand that, truly understand it, is the moment your life begins to change. Fecky notes of the speech: your value is not determined by others' recognition, but by your own clarity of self-worth. Seeking validation from those who don't value you leads to emotional burnout and loss of identity. Setting boundaries is not about distance. It's about self-respect and preservation of energy. People who don't value you are often unqualified to understand your worth. Don't let them define it. The lesson isn't about changing others, but about choosing yourself with peace, grace, and purpose. Your value is not determined by others' recognition, but by your own clarity of self-worth. This truth is simple yet powerful. Many people live their lives waiting for someone else to affirm their importance. They want to hear words of approval, applause, or even affection just to feel valid. But when those things are absent, they begin to doubt themselves. They start questioning their decisions, their talents, even their right to take up space. The reason this happens is because they've handed over the power to define their worth to someone else. That is a dangerous position to be in, because when you tie your value to someone else's recognition, you make it conditional. And conditional worth is fragile. It breaks the moment the other person changes their mind, withdraws their attention, or fails to understand you. Think of a diamond buried underground. It doesn't lose its value just because no one's discovered it yet. Its worth is inherent. In the same way, your value isn't something that fluctuates based on how others see you. It's something that must be rooted deep within, in the knowledge of who you are, what you stand for, and what you bring to the table. But that inner clarity doesn't just happen. It has to be built. It comes from self-awareness, reflection, and choosing not to measure yourself against shifting standards. We live in a world that rewards visibility. If you're not being liked, followed, praised, or noticed, you start feeling invisible. And that sense of invisibility becomes painful when you haven't developed a strong internal compass. So what do most people do? They try to become more visible. They become louder, more agreeable, more available. But the irony is that the more you try to be seen by people who don't even care to look closely, the more you lose sight of yourself. And that is how people end up feeling empty, even in a crowd. Clarity of self-worth means knowing that you are valuable, not because someone else says so, but because you've done the work to believe it yourself. It means recognizing that your kindness, your intellect, your passion, your principles, and your peace are not up for auction. It means you don't have to lower your standards or silence your voice just to fit into someone else's frame of reference. You become okay with not being everyone's favorite. You become okay with not being chosen because you already chose yourself. People often say, if they can't see your worth, it's their loss. And while that sounds comforting, it misses something deeper. The issue isn't just that they missed your worth. It's that you expected them to define it in the first place. You expected someone to see you clearly when they don't even see themselves clearly. You hope someone would appreciate you deeply when they don't even appreciate their own life. That's a cycle of disappointment waiting to happen. You are not responsible for teaching people how to value you. You are responsible for showing up in your truth with consistency and allowing your presence to speak for itself. You don't need to convince anyone of your loyalty or your goodness. You simply need to live it and trust that the right people will notice while the wrong ones naturally drift away. But this requires strength. It requires self-discipline. It requires tuning out the noise and tuning into your inner voice, the one that knows your journey, your pain, your sacrifices. You begin to walk differently when you know who you are. You stop trying to impress and instead start to express. You become less interested in proving and more focused on growing. Your self-worth becomes quiet but unshakable. It no longer needs to shout to be heard. When you develop clarity of your self-worth, everything changes. You make better decisions. You stop chasing unavailable people. You start protecting your peace. You choose quality over quantity in every area of life, relationships, work, conversation time. You become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of wisdom. You understand that not everyone is meant to sit at your table because not everyone respects what you're serving. And in this clarity, you begin to find a sense of power, not power over others, but power within yourself, the power to walk away, the power to say no, the power to be alone without being lonely. You realize that self-worth isn't a feeling, it's a foundation. And once it's set, no rejection, no criticism, and no silence from others can ever shake it. Seeking validation from those who don't value leads to emotional burnout and loss of identity. This is one of the most silent yet destructive patterns we fall into. At first, it may look harmless. You try a little harder, give a little more, speak a little softer just to be accepted or appreciated. But over time, what begins as a small compromise becomes a lifestyle of self-neglect. You slowly start abandoning your authenticity in exchange for approval. And the tragedy is, even after all that effort, you still don't feel seen because the people you're trying to impress were never truly capable of valuing you in the first place. Validation is a basic human need. We all want to feel acknowledged, appreciated, and affirmed. But when that need becomes dependent on someone who constantly withholds it, you enter a dangerous emotional loop. You begin to interpret their coldness as a sign that you're not enough, so you double your effort. You become hyper aware of your words, your actions, and your flaws. You start questioning your value based on their reactions or lack thereof. This becomes exhausting. Emotionally, it feels like running a marathon on a treadmill, moving constantly but getting nowhere. What makes it even harder is that the validation you're chasing is often inconsistent. There might be moments when they show a little attention, say something nice, or act like they care. And those small moments keep you hooked. You tell yourself, maybe they do value me, or maybe if I try harder, things will change. But this is what makes the cycle so painful. You're not just chasing validation, you're chasing hope. Hope that you'll finally be good enough in their eyes. But the more you seek approval from the wrong person, the more distant your true self becomes. Over time, this need for validation reshapes your identity. You stop doing things that make you happy and start doing things that will gain them approval. You are masked. You filter your truth. You say yes when you mean no. You shrink when you should stand tall. And even when you're surrounded by people, you feel alone because no one is connecting with the real you. They're only seeing the version of you that you crafted to be liked. This leads to a deep internal conflict because even if they eventually accept you deep down, they're not accepting you, but the version you perform for them. This constant bending and adjusting chips away at your spirit. You begin to feel tired in a way that rest can't fix. That's emotional burnout. When your soul is exhausted from constantly trying to prove itself. You feel numb, frustrated, and even resentful. But often, you don't know why. That's because you've been suppressing your own needs for so long that your mind can't tell who you're trying to be anymore. And here's the hardest part. We often mistake this burnout for weakness in ourselves. We tell ourselves we need to be stronger, more patient, more understanding. But in reality, what we need is not more strength to endure poor treatment. What we need is the clarity to walk away from situations that demand our silence, our compromise, and our pain in exchange for conditional acceptance. Seeking validation from those who don't value you is a slower measure of self. You begin to live for the approval of someone else instead of living from the truth of who you are. And it's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it looks like constantly explaining yourself, over-apologizing, being afraid to disappoint, or feeling anxious when you haven't heard back from someone. All of this comes from the belief that your worth is tied to their recognition. But when you realize that validation is most powerful when it comes from within, you start to break the cycle. You no longer rely on others to remind you of who you are. You become the one who sets the standard for how you deserve to be treated. And that shift is the beginning of healing. Not because others change, but because you stop needing them to. You reclaim your voice, your space, your energy. You start choosing people who see you without having to perform. You learn to sit with yourself without needing external affirmation. And slowly, you begin to remember who you were before you tried to be everything for everyone else. The journey back to your identity begins the moment you stop seeking validation from those who never valued you to begin with. Setting boundaries is not about distance. It's about self-respect and preservation of energy. Many people misunderstand boundaries. They see them as walls meant to push people away, as cold, rigid barriers built from anger or resentment. But in truth, boundaries are not about creating separation. They are about creating clarity. They are not about keeping people out. They are about keeping yourself in. Boundaries allow you to show up in relationships with honesty, stability, and peace. They protect your time, your energy, your values, and your emotional well-being. Without them, you end up drained, resentful, and disconnected from yourself. When you don't set boundaries, you give others silent permission to overstep. You leave the door open for others to treat you based on their standards instead of yours. And over time, this starts to show. You begin to say yes when you really mean no. You start to stretch yourself too thin just to be accepted or liked. You feel guilty for prioritizing your needs, even though those needs are completely valid. This isn't selflessness, it's self-abandonment. And while it might win you temporary approval, it costs you your emotional health. People often think that setting boundaries will make others angry, disappointed, or distant. And yes, sometimes it will. But that discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that your boundaries are finally being noticed. You are shifting the dynamic from one-sided tolerance to mutual respect. And anyone who truly values you will understand that, because respect does not grow in chaos. It grows in clarity, and boundaries create that clarity. You don't need to explain or justify your boundaries to everyone. You don't need to write a speech or provide a backstory. A simple, "I'm not available for that," or "that doesn't work for me," is enough. The people who respect you won't need more. The ones who push back are often the ones who are benefiting from your lack of boundaries in the first place. And when you begin to protect your peace, those people might accuse you of changing. But the truth is, you're not changing. You're just finally honoring yourself. That shift can be uncomfortable for others, especially those used to a version of you that always gave in, stayed quiet, or put yourself last. The power of boundaries isn't in how loudly you state them, but in how consistently you live by them. It's easy to draw a line once. It's harder to stand by it when people test it. But every time you reinforce your boundaries, you send a message to yourself: my needs matter, my time matters, my well-being matters. That message, repeated over time, becomes the foundation of self-respect. And self-respect isn't just about confidence, it's about alignment. It's about living in a way that matches your values instead of constantly compromising them to keep the peace. Boundaries also help you conserve emotional energy. Life already demands so much of you, from work, family, and responsibilities. If you don't protect your energy, you end up giving your best to things that drain you and leaving nothing for the things that nourish you. Without boundaries, you say yes to every demand, every favor, every toxic conversation, and eventually you start feeling overwhelmed, irritable, and even bitter. But that bitterness isn't about other people. It's a signal from within that you've overextended yourself. It's your inner self reminding you that you've ignored your own limits for too long. Boundaries are not cold, they are kind. They allow you to show up for others without losing yourself. They help you give from a place of fullness, not obligation. They prevent resentment from growing and create healthier, more respectful connections. When you have boundaries, you stop trying to control others' reactions and start focusing on your own intentions. You learn to disappoint others without betraying yourself. And that is a powerful shift, to be able to honor your truth without guilt. The more you practice setting boundaries, the more natural it becomes. You learn that saying no doesn't make you rude. Taking space doesn't make you selfish. Prioritizing rest doesn't make you lazy. It makes you honest. It makes you strong. It keeps you grounded in a world that constantly demands your attention. And slowly you start attracting people who don't just respect your boundaries, they appreciate them. because they see the peace and authenticity they bring. Boundaries aren't just rules. They are expressions of self-awareness. They are choices you make every day to protect your energy, guard your mental health, and preserve your purpose. And in doing so, you're not just protecting yourself, you're building a life that feels safe, true, and whole. People who don't value you are often unqualified to understand your worth. Don't let them define it. This is a truth most people learn through pain. We often assume that just because someone is in our life, a friend, a partner, a boss, a family member, they automatically have the ability to recognize our value. But the reality is, not everyone has the emotional intelligence, the life experience, or the depth of perception to truly understand who you are and what you bring. Yet, when they overlook us, we take it personally. We internalize their lack of appreciation as evidence that we're not enough. And that's where we go wrong. Because when someone can't see your worth, it often has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own limitations. Not everyone can see beyond the surface. Some people measure worth based on what you can give them, how much you agree with them, or how well you fit into their expectations. If you don't perform, if you set boundaries, if you express a different perspective, they may interpret that as arrogance, disobedience, or weakness. But in truth, those are often signs of strength, the strength to be authentic in the face of pressure. And if they cannot recognize that, it's not because you're lacking, it's because their lens is fogged by ego, insecurity, or narrow-mindedness. People who are unqualified to see your worth often operate from a place of control. They prefer relationships where they are superior, where they are the ones being admired, and where your light doesn't challenge their own comfort. So when you start to shine, grow, or speak your truth, they may downplay your contributions. They might mock your dreams, ignore your voice, or criticize your efforts. And when you're unsure of your own value, you might believe them. You might shrink yourself just to avoid their judgment. But that's not validation, that's manipulation. And the cost of that is your authenticity. You have to understand that some people are not capable of giving what you deserve. Not because you don't deserve it, but because they haven't done the inner work required to appreciate something beyond their immediate needs or limited understanding. Trying to gain their approval is like asking someone who's colorblind to admire a painting. They simply don't have the capacity to see what you see. And that's not your fault. Your worth is not diminished by their blindness. Their inability to recognize your value is a reflection of their limitations, not a confirmation of yours. Still, it hurts. It hurts when people you care about don't see your efforts. It hurts when your loyalty is taken for granted, when your compassion is overlooked, when your presence is treated like it's replaceable. But that pain is not a sign to work harder for their attention. It's a signal to stop giving your energy to people who were never qualified to hold it in the first place. You don't need to argue for your worth. You don't need to prove it. Worth is not something to be earned from others. It is something to be remembered within yourself. Once you truly understand your worth, you stop over-explaining, over-giving, and overstaying in places where you are not honored. You stop tolerating people who drain your energy and distort your value. You begin to filter your relationships through a new lens. Not, do they like me? But, do they see me? Do they respect me? Do they add peace or take it away? This shift allows you to reclaim your power. It gives you permission to walk away from people who can't meet you where you are, not out of pride, but out of clarity. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that being misunderstood means being wrong. But the most authentic people in the world are often misunderstood because they don't conform. They don't dilute themselves for approval. They live with depth, with integrity, with purpose. And those things often threaten people who live on the surface. So if you feel unseen or undervalued, don't rush to fix yourself. Step back and ask, is this person even capable of seeing the real me? Or are they only comfortable with a version of me that stays small? You don't need everyone to understand you. You need the right people. Those who have the emotional maturity to recognize the depth of your heart, the weight of your journey, the strength behind your quiet, and the courage it takes to stay true in a world that constantly pressures you to be something else. And those people, they don't need convincing. They recognize your worth not because you scream it, but because you live it. You are not for everyone, and that is your strength. Because the ones who truly see you will never make you question your value. The lesson isn't about changing others, but about choosing yourself with peace, grace, and purpose. When someone doesn't value you, the natural instinct is to try harder. You think if you just say it differently, show up more consistently, be more patient, or bend just a little more, maybe they'll finally appreciate you. You fall into the trap of believing that if you change enough of yourself, you can change how someone treats you. But that mindset quietly erodes your confidence, because it makes your worth dependent on someone else's capacity to recognize it. And the truth is, some people will never value you no matter how much you give, not because you're not valuable, but because they are committed to misunderstanding you or benefiting from your silence. When you make it your mission to change others, you enter a losing game. People don't change because we beg them to. They change because they want to. And when someone doesn't want to respect you, trying to change them becomes an act of self-betrayal. You keep pouring yourself into a cup that has no bottom, and the more you pour, the more drained you become. You tell yourself that your love, patience, or effort will make the difference. But that belief can keep you stuck in a place where you are constantly giving but rarely receiving. It teaches you to equate love with struggle and acceptance with endurance. That's not growth, that's survival. And survival is not the same as peace. Choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness. It's an act of self-preservation. It's deciding that your mental health, your energy, your time, and your dignity are no longer up for sacrifice in places where they are not honored. Choosing yourself means saying, I am no longer willing to abandon myself just to be accepted by others. It's not about changing others to fit into your life. It's about recognizing who's never going to fit and having the strength to let go without resentment. That doesn't mean walking away with bitterness. It means walking away with grace. Grace is the ability to let go of what doesn't serve you without needing revenge or validation. It's learning to forgive people for not being who you needed them to be, while also forgiving yourself for staying longer than you should have. Grace allows you to exit situations with dignity, not damage. It allows you to move forward without carrying the weight of anger, because you understand that healing isn't about holding on. It's about release. There's power in knowing when to stop trying. Not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. You've realized that your worth isn't something to be proven to anyone. It's something to be lived by. You no longer beg for loyalty, attention, or consistency. You offer what you have, and if it's not enough for someone, you don't lower your value. You simply stop offering it to the wrong people. Choosing yourself teaches you to be intentional. It reminds you that peace is better than attention, that purpose is better than popularity, and that respect is better than approval. When you start choosing yourself, your relationships shift. You begin to attract people who respect your boundaries, who listen without dismissing you, who show up without needing to be begged. You stop chasing and start connecting. You no longer entertain shallow connections just to feel wanted. Instead, you seek depth, honesty, and mutual respect. And even when that means having fewer people around you, it also means having better people around you. There's a quiet power that comes when you make peace with the idea that not everyone will value you. It frees you. It allows you to stop performing and start being. You don't need to constantly prove your worth. You already embody it. You move through life with more clarity and less fear. You stop fighting to be chosen and start choosing yourself every single day, not in arrogance, but in alignment with who you are and who you're becoming. You'll find that life begins to feel lighter when you stop trying to change people and start living your truth. The energy you once used to hold broken relationships together is now used to build yourself up. You create space for growth, for healing, for real joy. You learn to be proud of yourself, not because others approve, but because you're finally being honest with who you are. And in that honesty, you discover something deeper than validation. You discover peace. The secret to dealing with people who don't value you is not about changing them. It's about returning to yourself. When you stop chasing validation, when you stop lowering your standards just to be accepted, when you start setting boundaries with calm certainty, and when you recognize that some people are simply not equipped to see your worth, you begin to live differently. You begin to live in alignment with your truth, not in reaction to someone else's ignorance. Real strength isn't found in fighting to be seen. It's found in walking away from places where you're ignored and choosing every single time to stand in your own light. Because the most powerful response to being undervalued is not bitterness. It's self-respect, peace, and the quiet decision to no longer participate in your own diminishment. That's not giving up on people. That's choosing yourself with clarity, with grace, and with purpose.